Alrighty, well hey, thank you everybody for coming through, much appreciated here. So before we get started, I'm just going to take a really quick poll. How many people here have to deal with a manual process? I should see everyone's hand up. Awesome, and a follow-up question to that is, how many people here want to automate that manual process? Yes, awesome. Well hey, you're in luck because that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about some ways which you can automate some of your user lifecycle processes. So first things first, we'll start with some introductions. My name is Greg, and together with Amaresh, we're going to take you through some of the ways that you can automate your lifecycle management. And we'll start with a little quick introduction about Scribd, about Multiplier, talking about a little bit what we do, and also a little bit about ourselves. We're then going to move into some of the challenges that we faced when trying to work on our user lifecycle management and some of the solutions that we came up with to address those challenges. Well, next, we'll talk about a specific use case, which is access management and access requests, and how we use Multiplier to help us automate those things. Next, we're going to talk about some of the lessons that I've learned along the way when deploying these workflows, and hopefully help you, I can help you avoid some mistakes that I've made along the way. And last but not least, we're going to go ahead and conclude everything with a quick summary and a quick wrap-up, where we're going to discuss kind of all the things that we talked about and a little TLDR. So hopefully everyone's ready to get their thinking hats on, and let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. So before I start, I just want to do a quick thing and say I work for Scribd, but all these are opinions of my own, not the opinions of Scribd. The lawyers made me put that in here. So now that that's out of the way, what is Scribd? Well, Scribd is the reading subscription service that's trying to change the way that the world reads. And what does it do? Well, it does a bunch of stuff, as you can see on there, but mainly what we offer access to ebooks, audiobooks, magazines, articles, and much, much more. And what I do is I'm the IT engineer on the IT team. I work on primarily automation, making systems talk to each other, and Jira is one of the systems. And yeah, like I said, I automate the things. That's kind of my job. If we need to do some kind of manual process, it's my job to fix that situation and make it automated. And last but not least, I'm not just about automation. Automation is cool, but if it's not actually used or if it doesn't fit into the whole process, the business cycle, it's not really going to be useful, right? So my job is not just to automate stuff, but to integrate all the systems that we have talking to each other between HR, IT, and various other departments. And I'm going to let Amaresh come up here and talk a little bit about his background.
Hey everyone, my name is Amaresh. I'm one of a small number of former Atlassians here. I was previously on the product team on Jira Service Management, and now I'm scratching my entrepreneurial itch by building Multiplier. We're an app on the Atlassian marketplace, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the talk.
Awesome, thank you. Cool, so let's start with why we even use Jira Service Management in the first place at Scribd. So first things first, it's scalable. We found that even though we've set up Jira Service Management when we were fairly small amount of people. As we've grown as a company, as we've hired more people, as the process have gotten a little bit more complex, it's been able to keep up. So scalability is a very, very important thing to us, and it's certainly available in Jira Service Management. Another thing is that it's very, very auditable. As we started maturing as an organization, as we needed to do more compliance checks, as we got audited, rather than having to manually pull screenshots and associate different things with one another, we could just simply use JQL queries to get access reviews and things of that nature. So very, very awesome for auditability. Next, Jira Service Management is very flexible, right? Every organization has its own flows, and with all the different things that you're given that you can do with Jira Service Management, it's extremely flexible. It's, sometimes it's a bit complex to set things up, but because of that complexity, you can do a lot of different things. And last but not least, it's user-friendly, right? So once you have things set up, from the customer perspective, people enjoy using a service desk, submitting a request in the form of a service management queue versus like a Jira queue, especially if you're a non-engineer. If you don't work in Jira all day, having the Jira Service Management request portal is very, very beneficial. And also from the perspective of IT, for support techs, they enjoy using Jira very, very much because once you customize it to the way that you want it to work for you, it's very easy to use and super effective. And so Jira is awesome, but Jira works best with other tools, right? So some of the tools that we use, one of them is Okta. Okta obviously our directory service. It's our source of truth. It's also our SSO that we use for getting into Atlassian products. But we also use something called Okta Workflows, which helps us automate things with a no code. And it's kind of like a very good platform to run different automations, especially with Jira. Another thing that we use is Slack. So we live in Slack. Most of y'all probably are the same. If you have some kind of communication tool, people live in it, right? They don't want to leave it. They want to get their notifications to that. So we use Slack mostly for receiving notifications, for approvals, for just getting updates that happen in Jira directly to Slack. And people much prefer that workflow than actually going into Jira and checking their emails or such. Next, we use Confluence, right? We love Confluence. Confluence works great with Jira. We use it for our runbooks. We use it for things like internal documentation and also customer-facing documentation. So helping people, help themselves so we ultimately get less requests. And last but not least, we use Multiplier, which we're going to talk a little bit about more later on. But basically what it allows us to do is it allows us to use the data that we have in Okta in Jira and not have to kind of create manual things and just pull data directly from Okta and use it in workflows to populate fields, things of that nature. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later down the line. So user lifecycle challenges, right? What does that mean? How do I define that as? So for me, what I see it as is it's a typical user lifecycle, right? So we have the onboarding, we have the mid-lifecycle, and we have the offboarding, right? Sounds simple, but as we all know, it's not simple. There's a lot of things that happen between those things, right? There's a lot of points of failure. A lot of these processes that happen here might be manual. And what we want to do, what the goal here is to basically take this and try to automate as much as we can, right? So like I said, we're going to be focusing on those main things. We're going to focus on the onboarding workflows. We're going to focus on some offboarding workflows. We'll talk about some mid-lifecycle requests. And also, part of the mid-lifecycle is going to be talking about access requests, which we're going to mention Multiplier, and explain how we use that. All right? So let's start with the first thing, onboarding, right? So before we actually did any type of automation, the way that it worked was like this. We have various departments. We have HR, office team, the talent team. They all have various pieces of information that pertain to somebody starting at Scribd. And what we usually did was the sole IT person would be the one to wrangle up all that information, right? They would all come to us. They would all ask us all these different questions and have different pieces of information in Slack, in email, in forms. And we had to wrangle it all up and put it into a manual ticket, right? Now, the problem with this is that, copy-pasting, manual processes like that, they're very prone to error, right? So sometimes we would have a sloppy mistake, like a misspelled last name, or maybe we grabbed someone's legal name instead of their preferred name. Things like that, right? Manual process, not ideal. And then another manual process was creating the actual user in Okta itself, right? Again, we're taking copy-pasting stuff, possible mistakes, and also, sometimes we don't have all the information that we even need up front, right? Maybe while we're wrangling all the information, we don't have like a preferred shipping address, or maybe we don't have the person's department. So days would happen. It was just not a very scalable solution whatsoever, right? So we needed to change that. So what do? Well, we decided that all the folks who have that information and are the gatekeepers of various info, they should continue doing that. We don't want to wrestle with that information anymore. Instead, we want them to just put everything into our HRIS, which is Bamboo HR. Now, you guys might use something different. That's what we use, but most HRIS services have, a way that you can populate information into it through, having different departments do that. And then once all the information that we needed was in Bamboo HR, we went ahead and used the event of importing a person from Bamboo HR into Okta, where basically, I'll talk a little bit about how we did data validation, but basically what we would do is we would check the person in Bamboo HR, make sure that they have all the relevant fields there. If they did, they were successfully imported to Okta automatically. And then once they were imported into Okta, we would then create an automatic ticket from that import event, right? Because an import in Okta is, you can listen to that, it's a webhook, so we can tie into that and trigger a ticket that will automatically populate all the relevant things that we need. And what this did was it basically removed any type of manual process, right? We don't have to copy paste. We don't have to look for validation. We have something that does it for us. And the way that went down is a little like this. So first things first is we have a trigger, right? A A trigger that, and our trigger is importing a person from Bamboo HR into Okta. It's a webhook, we can tie into it. That fires off, and we get a validation stage, where what happens is all of the information that just moved from Bamboo HR into Okta gets sifted through, and if something is missing, if there's a required field that is missing, for example, a department, a manager, a shipping address, if it's missing, it will go ahead and send an alert to the relevant Slack channel for that relevant team, and it'll say, hey, this field is missing, IT can't take action until you fix it, so go ahead and update it in Bamboo HR and let IT know so we can go ahead and re-import the person. Now, if nothing's missing, everything's good, then we have a Jira ticket that gets created successfully. And once that Jira ticket gets created, that means that the person is already in Okta, they're activated, they're ready to go, we have everything we need, so we send a completion, right? We send a completion alert to all the teams involved in this process to say, hey, IT's done, you can go ahead and start doing what you need to do. And last but not least, if there's any API errors that happen, if there's some kind of weird just back-end error that happens anywhere throughout that process, we have error handling, which again, we love Slack, so we have an alert sent to Slack, and we're able to do an actionable item to fix that. And that's onboarding. That's what we did to kind of automate our onboarding. And I think for us, it was really awesome because we were able to basically fully automate it, where we don't have to go in and manually copy paste and avoid all these spelling errors and whatnot. So that's an example of something that we basically fully automated. The next thing I want to talk about is offboarding, which is kind of the opposite of the onboarding, right? And you'll see that it's very similar, right? Again, what did we start with? We started with, once again, various people from various departments having different pieces of data that's relevant to the termination of a person. And once again, it all went to an IT person, and it was up to an IT person to go ahead and wrangle all that information up. And needless to say, again, it was tedious, prone to error, there was delays often, and again, what we would do is we would need to create a manual Jira ticket, right? We IT folks, we always work on different things at the same time. We need a centralized place to track these things, right? So we have to have a ticket, so it would be up to us to create one manually. And then, once we would create the manual ticket, we did what I like to call the manual access removal scramble, which is because we didn't have anything written down, because we really were at the stage where if something wasn't controlled by Okta, if our access wasn't controlled by SSO, we didn't know what people had. There was a lot of shadow IT. There was a lot of applications that people just didn't tell us that existed, and so we would often miss removing people from applications. We would oftentimes, just overlook certain things. And it was, again, not a very scalable process, very, very prone to error, and it would cause us to, potentially fail an audit. So this was a very, very big deal, and we wanted to, change that. And so what did we do? Well, we did kind of a similar thing, where instead of us gathering all that information, putting it into a ticket manually, just told all the three departments that, in this case, it's the manager, the office team, the HR, all of them have their relevant things. We told them, hey, put it all in Bamboo HR, right? When a person gets terminated, you can mark them as terminated in Bamboo HR, and we can use that as an automation to trigger the deactivation of their Okta account, right? And for us, because Okta controls most of the access, that basically meant that 80% of the stuff that the person was given access to is gone, it's all good. And for the remaining stuff, this is the part where we'll go into some of the manual things that we still have to do, right? There's an automated ticket that gets created, but within that ticket, we have various tasks, right? So sometimes it's inevitable, maybe there's an application that's not behind Okta, it's not behind any type of SSO, not behind Google, it just you have to go in manually and remove the person. So what we did was, instead of having to do the scramble and guess and check and kind of have this unknown, what we did was we had a main ticket. It would look something like this, and it would have the relevant information for us to actually have to, to be able to do everything we need to do, to take actionable action right away and not have to go back and forth with any department. And underneath it, we used automation for Jira to basically create for us subtasks, and these subtasks would be for the manual things that we actually had to do. Now, I want to drive this point home really, really clearly. Automation isn't it's not all or nothing, right? Just because you can't automate something fully doesn't mean you shouldn't automate up to as much as you can. In this case, the ideal state, obviously, would be instead of these subtasks, we would have some kind of, script or some kind of workflow out there that would go in, call each one of these APIs for these shadow IT apps and actually do the removal. But we're not quite there yet, right? We don't have the resources, we don't have the time, whatever it is. But, just because we don't have that fully doesn't mean we shouldn't have something like subtasks automatically generated. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to strive to automate as much as we can and then iterate, right? Automation isn't an end-all thing. It's constantly evolving, constantly iterating. And if you can't get to somewhere 100%, getting there 80% and then planning to do the rest later is absolutely acceptable. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So that's a little bit about offboarding. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the mid-lifecycle requests. And this is an interesting one because, as a company, we really do believe that people should have various ways of contacting IT, right? We don't want to limit it to just a Slack channel or just a service desk or just to, an email. And some of the popular ways that we got hit up with is, obviously first and foremost, Slack. Someone sends you a DM. You open the DM, you go do something else, and it's gone. You don't know who Slacked you, you don't remember, and the next day, next morning or whatever, you wake up and you're like, oh man, I forgot to follow up with this person. And they're unhappy, you feel unhappy. It was a bit of a mess. And then another popular way was people coming up to us in person, right? When the offices were open, people would come to us and say, hey, can you fix this really quickly, or can I get this hard piece of hardware, or this software? And that would also kind of break our concentration. And obviously it wasn't tracked, right? It was just someone asks, you do it, and then you can't track your work. And then last but not least, if we had people who came from bigger corporations or who were more traditionally inclined to communicate via email, we would have emails come in, right? And it would come in, all these problems, like the main problem with these areas was that all of these requests would go to one person, right? It wouldn't go to like an IT email, it wouldn't go to all of us, it would just be someone is hitting you up directly. And obviously the issue with that is, we do a lot of context switching, we have a lot of things in flight, sometimes we just can't get to things, right? And so, again, it would go to an IT person, and one of two things would happen. The first, which is the ideal, is that we would manually open up a Jira ticket, right? That's the right thing to do. And if you're doing that, if you're not caught up in some kind of work, or if you're not really concentrating on something, that'll usually happen. But unfortunately, the other thing that happens is it gets lost in the void. So you have that person come up and ask you that question, or they ask you in Slack, or they send you that email, and then you're just doing too many other things and you just forget about it, right? And then everyone's unhappy. So this was not a very good or effective way of handling requests. And so what do? Well, like I said earlier, we really do believe that people should have multiple ways of getting to IT, right? They should be able to send a Slack message. They should be able to ask us in person. They should be able to email us. However, instead of going to a single point of contact, we wanted it all to go to the service desk. Because this way, what we can do is we can go ahead and triage each of those requests to the appropriate IT person, right? Sometimes there's certain people on the IT team that specialize in things, and a request going to them directly will ensure that it's done much quickly and much higher quality than maybe someone else that might get hit up directly. Also we have different projects, different capacity, we're working on different things, right? So triaging these requests is very, very critical in both increasing the service level, like the capacity at which you can operate and provide service, but also the quality in the service that you provide. Because if you get the request to the right person, the service that they'll provide, the quality, the satisfaction that you'll get from your customer will be much, much higher. And so, for us, we have a service desk. And our service desk consists of several sections like IT support, access requests, purchase requests, things of that nature, right? Went ahead and assessed in our environment what are the things that people mostly ask for, and so we built the service desk specifically for those types of things. And then within each request, within each request type, we have specific fields and specific questions that we require for folks to actually fill out. So as you can see, the summary field has a red asterisk. That means that it's a required field. You can't just submit a ticket without giving us a summary. This is a specific hardware issue. So as you can see, the hardware is also asterisks. Sometimes you get a Slack message saying, hey, Safari's not working. Well, what does that mean? On your phone, on your laptop, on your personal device? We don't know. This way it ensures that they have to give us that specific information. And the reason that we have those required fields is so that we can start working right away. We don't have to do back and forth with the person. We don't have to ask questions. We can just get the request, have all the relevant things that we need initially, and just get to work, right? If we have any questions along the way, obviously we'll ask them. But this helps us out kind of, get things going right away, and helps us solve these requests much quickly and turn around, them really quickly. And I will say, as soon as we did implement the service desk and had all these request types, it was definitely a bit of a learning curve, right? It was hard to, at first, convince people that going to a service desk is going to be more effective than going directly to a person, because people have their IT guy that they go to, IT guy or gal, right? Like if you worked with somebody that provided exceptional service for you, you're going to continue asking them, right? And that becomes annoying. That becomes a little bit cumbersome. I know I have a bunch of people who always come to me about these really basic requests. And I'm just like, dude, I'm the IT engineer. Like, I'm coding right now. I can't give you a license. You know what I mean? So, but we noticed that as soon as people started embracing this, customers were much more satisfied because we were able to turn things around way more quickly. When we triage, we had a queue master. They would know who does what. They would assign to the tickets to appropriate people, and we would just get shit done quickly. Like this is the benefit of this. So yeah, that's a little bit about the mid-life cycle requests. And now I'll talk a little bit about a specific example about those mid-life cycle requests, which is access requests, right? Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we were maturing as a company. We're growing. We're constantly asked to start being compliant under certain compliance regimens. We're getting audited. And so one of the biggest things that we were asked for is to provide evidence of approvals, right? So that people aren't just getting access to a system because they ask for it, but they're actually going through a legitimate approval process. And that became a really huge growing pain. Because we didn't know, do we manually put in all the applications into Jira? Do we have to add an application manually into Jira every time that we get one? It just seemed like so much work. It seemed very, very cumbersome. And furthermore, up until recently, you couldn't have data in the Jira user object. You couldn't associate a Jira user with a manager. You would have to grab the Jira user and then look up the rest of the person's attributes in a separate system. And so what we did was, with our friends over at Multiplier, we were actually able to sync all the information from Okta into Jira and use that information to populate relevant fields, right? For instance, to populate an approval field or to populate an application request field, all without having to actually manually put all this information into Jira. It would just grab it from Okta and then pull it into Jira itself. And so I'm going to let Amaresh step up here and talk a little bit more about a Multiplier.
Thanks so much, Greg. So when I talk to IT teams at most companies, typically ones that are 500 employees or larger, they tell me that over 50% of their incoming IT tickets are access requests. That sounds crazy. So Multiplier gives these teams a way to really streamline those workflows, and I'm going to show you how. So a typical access request workflow for Scribd looks something like this. It involves a user having to go into Jira, create a ticket, IT having to then manually route it to the right person, oftentimes the manager, for approval. Wait for approval, chase up the person, remind them, send them follow-ups, and then finally, once the manager approves, go ahead, log into Okta, and then provision the application. So as you can see, lots of steps involved, lots of places where things sort of just fall down and you need constant reminders. So now with the help of Multiplier, they've really been able to streamline this workflow and save a lot of time. Now when the user visits the portal, they are able to self-serve from an app store that's been embedded in their portal. Multiplier then takes over and figures out if approvals are needed, and if so, who's the right person to route it to. And once the approval is granted, it goes ahead and provisions access, and then automatically closes out the ticket once the application's been provisioned. So this is what it looks like. This is a Multiplier dashboard within Jira that automatically syncs all of their applications that are connected to Scribd's Okta and lets them sanction which apps are available for end users to request. So now, when an employee goes to file an access request for an application, they see a dynamic list of apps that are populated in their service catalog that have all been sanctioned by IT, including the level of access that they're looking for. And having all of these requests, like the example here, come into Jira really helps Scribd sail through all of their access requests and all of their audits and access reviews. So to recap, there are three main benefits that Scribd has seen since they've started using Multiplier. The first is boosting end user productivity and satisfaction by being able to offer them self-service. The second benefit is that we can turn access requests into a fully touchless process for their IT team, and they no longer need to chase people for approvals and manually provision access. Multiplier routes approvals to the right people, often the manager, and the managers can then decide whether or not to grant someone access. And lastly, with this process happening in Jira, IT now has a super clear audit trail of who's been given access to what tool, which resource, when, why. All of that is now in Jira. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Greg, who's going to talk about some of the lessons he's learned.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amaresh. Cool. Yeah, so we love Multiplier, as you can see. It's been really, really instrumental in improving the, just the way that we use Jira. So definitely check them out. They have a booth over there, booth number 27. Yes, definitely check them out. So let's talk about some lessons learned, right? The first lesson, and this is the biggest one, field types really, really matter. Why? Because once you create them, you can't modify them. You can only destroy them. And what I mean by that is when you're working towards maybe building out some kind of request, it's very important to take the field type and consider, what am I going to use this field for? Am I going to use this to pull a request? Because if I'm going to try to pull data from it, it can't be a free text field. It has to be a predefined drop-down menu. And I made that mistake after I built out the whole thing, and I realized, oh crap, I can't audit this. And so I had to go back. I had to rebuild, recreate a field, re-add it to all the various screens. It was a very large pain in my butt. And so definitely consider, like, before you go ahead, before you start building out everything, and before you commit and move on to the next fields, really make sure that the field that you're creating is of the proper request type. You definitely should reference the documentation and just make sure, like, if you're going to try to query this field, if you're going to try to do some kind of manipulation with it, that it fits the right, because not all field types can do all the same things, right? So that's the first lesson I learned. Very, very important lesson. The second lesson I learned is you should really reduce the amount of issues that you use, right? So for us, like, we found that the more issue types you have, the more level of complexity you add, right? Issue types and request types are very different. An issue type is kind of meant to be a very high-level thing. And so, for example, at Scribd, we decided on three main issue types: no approval, single approval. It might be different. You might have different types of approvals or workflows in your organization. But what you should do, you should really try to capture, like, all the, you see what kind of requests you get. Try to capture all of them and try to make, like, a common 2, 3, 4 types of issue types, and then you can customize your request type after that. The request type can have all the custom fields, all the custom things in there. So yeah, definitely don't try to do what we do. We try to create an issue type per request type. Horrible. Not the way that Jira is meant to be used. Don't do it. So that's the second thing that I learned that I hope that you guys can avoid doing. Make sure you just pick a few types and stick to them. And last but not least, Jira automation is super, super powerful. It's not the same that it used to be 2 years ago. You should definitely take some time to deep dive and learn what you can do with it. You might actually find that a lot of the things that you want to do, you're able to do through Jira automation. You don't need to actually even reach out to a third party. As a matter of fact, Jira automation has a bunch of third-party integrations. They integrate with PagerDuty, with Slack. With Multiplier, they can integrate to Okta. So definitely, take a look at Jira automation because it's very, very powerful. Again, it's not how it used to be. Like, they're constantly adding much, much more functionality to it. And you can do some very, very high-level things with it. So that being said, let's go ahead and just summarize really quickly what I talked about here. And if you didn't pay attention to anything, if you just weighed these 3 key things, I think you would have had that's basically the gist of what I've been trying to say. So first things first is automate all or as much of the things, right? Automation isn't an end-all, be-all. Like, it's not all or nothing. If you can automate as much of something as you can, do it, right? And then plan to iterate, plan to improve that automation. That's what we did, right? We have some things that are fully automated. We have some things that are partially automated. It's all about crawling, walking, and then running, right? Just because you can't run doesn't mean you shouldn't walk, doesn't mean you should continue crawling, right? So you gotta build as much automation as you can, and then plan to improve it, plan to iterate it. Second, the thing that's very important is connect your tools to Jira, right? Jira works really well, but it works better with its friends, right? Connect it to Okta, connect to your identities provider, connect it to Slack, connect it to PagerDuty, connect it to all the various things that you have. You'd be surprised in your stack how many things can talk to Jira. It's actually quite amazing. And then when you do evaluations for new software or for new vendors, make sure that they talk to Jira. Make sure that they have automations that are available for Jira. Because when you use Jira with other things in your ecosystem, it's a much better experience. A flow of information instead of copy pasting stuff is a world of difference. And last but not least, plan out your Jira Service Desk implementation by starting at the end. This will really help you avoid a lot of issues, because if you need to know where you want to be. You need to know what you want to get out of the service desk, and you need to know exactly why you're doing things, right? You need to develop a really good set of requirements, and then work off of those requirements backwards. That will help you avoid things like wrong fields. That will help you avoid things like creating issue types that are unnecessary. It'll help you avoid a lot of double work. So yeah, that's kind of basically wrapping up what I have to say. Obviously, I'm always happy to chat about Jira, about automation, about IT stuff. Love it all. There's all my links there. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm on GitHub if you want to see any of the automation that I work on, that I host. And also, obviously, on the Mac Admin Slack channel, if any of you live on there, that's me as well. And also Amaresh here as well. That's his information. That's the email that you should email if you have any questions about Multiplier. Thank you.